very much. Awesome. We're recording as well, FYI, everyone. We are recording this session today. All right, welcome to our session today. Today, we're going to talk about the definition of ready and definition of done. Our talk today is ready, set, done. Before we start, let me introduce myself very quickly. My name is Richard Chang. I am the VP of Training and Chief Product Owner here at Next Step Solutions. I am an Agile trainer and coach by background. I have a series of certifications, none of which is super relevant for today's session, but a lot of my background is working with commercial companies, government, as well as nonprofit and associations. Here's my contact information, and what I will do is I'm actually going to take my contact information here. I'm going to copy and paste this into the chat window so all of you have it handy. So here's my contact information. I'm going to copy and paste this into the chat window so all of you have it handy. Feel free to copy that down locally. On there, you have my email address. You have my LinkedIn. Feel free to join us on LinkedIn. We have Next Step Solutions LinkedIn. Feel free to join the organization on LinkedIn. Feel free to follow me on Twitter as well. Quick note, shameless plug. We do offer a whole variety of training services. So if any of you are interested in training, we have the whole series of Scrum Alliance trainings available to you. We also offer training in Kanban as well as SAFe, DevOps. We also have a few IC Agile classes. We do Agile testing, test automation, and Agile facilitation are all wonderful classes to take. Come to our website, nextstepsolutions.com, to learn more about our training offerings. I'll type that into the chat window as well. All right, let's go ahead and begin. So quick question to the group. Anyone here ever been in a painful sprint planning meeting before? If you have, type in yes in the chat window. Anyone here ever been in a painful sprint planning meeting before? If you have, type in yes in the chat window. If you have not, then consider yourself very lucky. Caitlin, you said, "Oi, yes." Caitlin, what made yours painful?
Can you hear me?
Yes. We can, yes.
Okay. I think it is sometimes more so the lack of involvement, the lack of, especially now with everything being virtual, not knowing what people are doing behind their cameras, and not paying attention, not having that full engagement in them.
That's a great point. Yeah, not having people engage, not getting that feedback. That's a great point. Yes, awesome, Caitlin. Who else wants to share? What else made your sprint planning meetings painful? Let me get another volunteer to share. Anna, I see your note here in the chat window. Walk me through what you just said.
Just not having enough defined work for the bandwidth that we have. That can be somewhat painful.
Yeah, no. So that stuff isn't ready. So you go in there and
right.
Oh, that's a great point too, right? And at that point, trying to figure out how to make up the time, product owners writing stuff real time.
Sure. And it could be also a case of we have an idea of what we need to do, but it's blocked because that component, that table we have to build a report off of hasn't been built or replicated. That sort of thing is definitely painful to have a backlog full of blocked stuff.
That makes a lot of sense, right? So that we don't know how to proceed because you have to unpack everything just to do one user story. Great point. Yeah, let's do one more. Who else wants to share? What made your sprint planning painful?
This is Johnny. I think that sometimes it can be considered painful when there's a off balance between the team's capacity and the product owner's expected workload.
Right, sure, yeah. So if the teams aren't aligned with the product owner, that could be an issue as well, right? And so I think those are all great points. I'll tell you the typical pattern that makes sprint planning painful. Oh, Farum, lack of participation, right? What does that mean, Farum? Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yeah, actually the lack of participation means just earlier she mentioned that we are behind cameras and everyone is just, we don't know what everyone is doing and they're not putting in their efforts and everything is not just planned actually and not prioritized earlier and we don't know what to do and how we are going to do it.
Okay, yeah, great points. That's a great point. Yeah, we don't know what to do. We don't know how to do it. Those are awesome points, right? I can tell you the general pattern that makes sprint planning painful. Here's a general pattern that makes sprint planning painful. You go to sprint planning, you talk about this very first user story. You spend an hour talking about this very first user story, and then you realize, oh no, we legitimately have 9 more of these to get through by the end of this meeting. And then you realize this meeting is going to stink, right? And the reason why it takes an hour is because no one's seen this yet. There's no acceptance criteria. It's barely written. No one, it's not thought out, or watching the product owner type it up real time. So that type of pattern is what tends to make sprint planning painful. And what happens when that happens, it's typically because we just haven't done product backlog refinement efficiently or effectively enough, right? So let me first introduce you to the concept of product backlog refinement. This picture represents product backlog refinement. Product backlog refinement is the act of adding new product backlog items to our product backlog as we learn about them, removing things that are stale or dated, reprioritizing based on latest learnings and needs, splitting things up that are too big, joining things together that may have logical groupings, paying particular attention that the items at the very top are ready for the team to consume. Quick question to the group. In theory, when should product backlog refinement be happening? You can type your answer in the chat window if you'd like. In theory, when should product backlog refinement be happening in theory? Yeah, no, these are good answers, right? In real time, all the time, throughout the sprints, right? Before sprint planning, right? These are all good answers. So what should happen is product backlog refinement should be happening organically throughout the sprint. Let me give you a calendar here. So here's a calendar. So in this calendar, we're doing 2-week sprint. So we have sprint planning on Monday, April 1st, right? And so then we sprint planning there, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 full days in our sprint. And then on this April 14th, the first half of the day is still part of the sprint. Second half of the day, we'll do the review and the retro. And the next day represents the start of the next sprint, right? So that's very typical of a 2-week sprint schedule. Right. Now, what happens in the schedule is sprint planning, refinement, like I said, should be happening organically throughout the sprint. For example, Tuesday, April 2nd, I, the product owner, met with a few stakeholders, learned some new requirements, wrote down 3 new user stories. I showed a couple of developers get feedback. That's refinement. Monday, April 6th, I, the product owner, I met with my leadership. We reprioritized a few things. That's refinement. Thursday, April 9th, I, the product owner, met with the help desk team. They gave me a few tickets that we should look at. I added some to backlog and tweaked and adjusted a few, had a few developers look at it. That's refinement. Tuesday, April 14th, I, the product owner, worked with my stakeholders and the entire Scrum team in sprint review, got a bunch of feedback, reprioritized a few things, removed a couple things, added a few new things. That's refinement. So in theory, refinement happens organically throughout the sprint, right? However, what we've seen is product owners are notoriously bad at doing refinement. So I'm going to show you something. Arne, I see you're in the group. Arne, cover your ears. Don't tell Scrum Alliance I told you this. But I'm going to show you a little trick that's helpful to get the product owner started on how to do refinement, which is the following, right? What you can do is set aside time to do refinement. Now, refinement is not a set meeting. It's an organic activity that happens throughout the sprint. But if your product owners are struggling to do refinement, what I recommend is setting aside time to do refinement. So in this picture here, what we're doing is Thursday, April 9th, what we're going to do here is we're going to set aside some time to do refinement. Now in the refinement, it'll be the product owner doing refinement. You'll have other dev team members potentially in there helping them, the Scrum Master in there coaching them. And in the refinement, what we're going to be doing is you're not adjusting the items in the current sprint. That's different. What you're doing is you're doing this type of stuff right here, getting the product backlog in good shape for the upcoming sprint. So in refinement, what you do here is you are adding new items as you learn about them, removing things that are stale or dated, reprioritizing based on latest learnings and needs, paying particular attention that the items at the very top are ready for the team to consume, right? And when you do that, what you're doing is you're getting the product backlog in good shape for this upcoming sprint planning meeting on April 15th, right? Now, So that's one technique, is to simply set aside time to do refinement so you make sure it happens. But I'm going to tell you the trick. Here's a secret. The secret to really making this work is, if I don't have other dev team members helping the proctor as we go, what you will do before the end of your refinement session is you'll bring in at least 2 dev team members. You can bring in as many as you want. Bring in the entire team if you want, but bring in at least 2 dev team members. And what you'll do with those 2 dev team members is you're going to show them the top items in the product backlog that we're probably going to work on in the upcoming sprint. And what the 2 dev team members will do is they will look at each one and give it a thumbs up if it's ready to be brought into sprint planning. Right. So what this brings up is a concept of definition of ready. Right. Now, there's a guy by the name of Bill Wake that has a good concept called INVEST. It stands for independent, negotiable, valuable, estimatable, small, and testable. Basically, that's a lens that Bill Wake talks about in terms of ensuring the user stories or requirements are ready for the team to consume. However, I kind of tweaked this over the years. And so what I have for my definition of ready is the following. So for my definition of ready, what I do is I have at least 2 developers look at the upcoming items, and they're going to identify the following. Number 1, do we understand what's being asked of us of this PBI/user story? For those not familiar with the term, the PBI stands for product backlog item. User story is a way to express it. Right. So do we understand what's being asked of us from this need? Number 2, do we understand the acceptance criteria? The acceptance criteria are the conditions of satisfaction, how we know the actual item is done. Number 3 is, do we understand why it's valuable? If it's not valuable, why are we doing it? Number 4 is, do we know how to implement this? Number 5, is it right sized? My recommendation, by the way, is if your sprints are 2 weeks long or longer, I recommend that nothing be more than about 4 or 5 days at most. So is it right size? Is it consumable within a sprint? Right. And number 6 is, if my developers have a better, faster, more effective, more efficient way of doing something, I want them to tell me, right? So what's going to happen is grab at least 2 dev team members to look at each one of these items. And what they'll do is they'll run through this 6-point checklist. Oh, by the way, what I have here is a great starting point. Your teams are free to use this as a starting point and kind of adjust this over time. But what I found anecdotally is that this is a great starting point to understanding if our items are ready for a team to consume. Right? Now, quick note about that. If any one of these first 3 items isn't true, right, it's up to the product owner to provide more understanding. If we don't understand what's being asked of us of the PBI/user story, if we don't understand the acceptance criteria, if we don't understand why it's valuable, that's a great conversation to have with the product owner to get more insights into that. Right. So if any one of the first 3 isn't true, it's really up to the product owner to provide more insights, understanding into that. Now, if number 4 isn't true, if the 2 developers, at least 2, grab as many as you want, but if our developers don't know how to implement that, that's an issue. There's a couple of ways to address that issue. So one way is developers could say, hey, product owner, this one's a bit more of a challenge. We're going to take this back to the rest of the team. We'll get back to you on this soonest. So the dev team members could just get take it back to the rest of the team, put more eyeballs on it. There's also another concept called the research spike, which comes from the XP world, the extreme programming world. So what developers might say, they might say something like, hey, product owner, this user story involves a technology that we've never used before. How about we do this? How about we create what we call a research spike? Let's time box this to myself and another developer. We'll take a better part of the day to research this. So maybe time box this to 12 hours total, so that after the time box, after the research spike, we have a better understanding how to implement this. So for number 4, you could use the research spike concept potentially, or just have more team members take a look at it. For number 5, if it's too big, we'll just simply say, hey, product owner, this one's too big. So at that point, what we should do is the product owner and dev team members should collaborate together to figure out how to break it down smaller. By the way, number 5, this is, I would say, one of the biggest problems that new Scrum teams address. When you have new Scrum teams that can't finish your work within your 2-week sprint cycles, oftentimes it isn't because they're bringing too much work into the sprint. It's because the nature of the work is too big. It's not inherently completable within your 2-week cycles. So to address that, you want to work together to break it down to smaller pieces. My recommendation is if your sprints are 2 weeks or longer, no item should be more than about 4 or 5 days at most. And really, I want things even smaller than that. All right. Number 6 is a very interesting one as well. Oftentimes when we write our user stories, we'll look for our team members to identify, look, they may have better, faster, more effective, more efficient ways to solve the same problem versus what I wrote. And when that happens, I don't want them to unilaterally change the user story. I, as a product owner, would not want them to unilaterally change the user story without the conversation, nor would I want them to never tell me those options. And so if my developers have a better, faster, more effective, more efficient way of doing it, we should have that conversation. Right? So in terms of understanding when these user stories are ready to be consumed, my recommendation is setting time aside to do it. If your product owners are really struggling to do refinement, setting time aside so that we purposely sit down and do it, and then using a definition of ready to kind of ensure that by the time we get to sprint planning, our sprint planning meeting isn't going to be painful. Any questions so far? Oh, hey, Faram, I see your question in the note. If you can't engage 2 devs, first thing you should do is give me a call because you need coaching, right? The problem has nothing to do with your user stories, your requirements. What you'd want to identify is why is it we have an environment where we can't even engage 2 devs to invest time to identify, to kind of help us do this refinement. My guess it's usually something like the deadlines are too tight. We have a culture that's not as collaborative. There could be a variety of reasons for this, but that's an underlying issue that you have to resolve to make your teams even better. Yeah, good question, Farhan. The question's in chat. What if we can't engage 2 devs? Then what do we do? Any other concepts in terms of the definition of ready? Any other questions in terms of the definition ready concept? Okay, good. Let's go to the other side of it then. Let's talk about definition of done. Question to the group. If a developer walks up to you and says, hey, this one's done, what does that mean? What does that mean? In your environment, if a developer walks up to you and says, this one's done, what does it mean? Let me ask you this question. Does it mean that all of the unit tests have run? Is that what it means? It means, okay, it means acceptance criteria is met. That's good. It means acceptance criteria is met. Does it mean the product owner's reviewed it yet? Oh, in the chat window, feel free to type in yes or no. Does it mean the product owner's reviewed it yet? Oh, okay. Does it mean legal's reviewed it yet? Does it mean that security scan's been run, right? Does it mean that it works on their machine, right? Oh, ready for release. So does that mean that the full regression test has been run? Or are you in an environment where sometimes, depending on which developer said it, it might be 2 different scenarios where developer 1, when they said this one's done, they are much more meticulous. It means it compiles, it goes through all of the automated unit tests, the integration tests, the regression tests, as well as having a code review, versus developer 2, when they say it's done, all means it compiles and now we're ready to start testing, right? So what happens is, what we want to do is create that shared understanding of done, which brings up the concept of definition of done, right? What I'm about to share with you is the actual technique I use to create a definition of done. So let me pull off the PowerPoint for just a minute. I'm gonna go to the slides instead. So here is, I'm gonna change my share. Give me 1 second here. All right, so all of you should now see my browser, and it should say definition done. Is that correct? Can everyone see my definition of done? Great, awesome. All right, so what I'm about to show you right now is the exact technique I use with my team to create a definition done. If we're all in person, we do this on we get post-it notes, we do it on a flip chart. Here virtually, you can use Mural to do this. So what we do first is we work together as a team to identify what it takes in our environments to get something from ready to start into production, right? And then what we do is we do a bit of silent writing to kind of call it out. So I'll give you an example. Oh, by the way, for those not familiar with Mural, you simply double click in here. It creates a post-it note. You can resize it and they can type into it. So let's say my definition done includes the unit tests have to pass. Okay. Has to pass the acceptance criteria. And let's say the product owner has to review it. All right. So those are some ideas, right? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share this link with all of you. So in the chat window, I'm going to put in this link. Right? So go ahead and copy and paste that link into your browsers. And what I want you to do is just go into this mural, find a spot somewhere, right? And think about in your environments, what does it take to get something from ready to start into production? So I'll give you some examples. So I wrote 3 of them: unit test, passes acceptance criteria, product and approval. Some other examples might be stuff like regression test, security review, legal review, end user document updated, ATO passes for you government folks, right? What I want you to do in here is just find a spot and type in some entries in your environments. What are some of the things you have to do or check off on before you can be done, before you can go to production? Security scan, that's a good one. 90% code coverage, that's a good one. Yep. We'll give you a few moments to do this. So what you're doing right here is exactly what I do with my teams to create a definition done. We will sit down, I'll go through that explanation, and we actually brainstorm through this. Business, IT, and business user testing completed. Good. No defects or bugs. Ooh, that's pretty hardcore. I love it. Release ready. Yep, great. Although release ready is kind of a broad term. What does it mean to be release ready? Request for review and acceptance. Good. Yep. Rate them. Okay, good. Give you just another moment, a few more moments to put some of these in. Yep. User acceptance testing. Yep. Regression testing, that's a big one. That's a big one. For those not familiar with the term, regression testing is a full end-to-end test of our product through all usable all capabilities, all features. Yeah, regression testing is a great one. Integration testing. Integration testing, for those not familiar, is testing multiple components together. User acceptance testing, for those not familiar, UAT, is testing where we simulate or have users, we actually have users do the testing or simulate the users doing testing. I like it better when the actual users do it. Yeah. Great. Anyone else? Okay, let's go with this for now. So what you have here is the first part. What we do is we all come in and we create our, we brainstorm through a definition done. And then what we do is we start kind of talking about and identify what we want as our team's official definition of done, right? Now, when we do this, what I see a lot of teams do is kind of a multi-tier system. What they'll do is some of the things are smaller that we'll do at the individual user story level. So things like the unit test passing, I see oftentimes at the user story level, passes the acceptance criteria, right? And product owner approval. Those are things that I almost always see here at the user story level. That means for a done, all 3 of these things have to pass, right? Now, there are some things that might be a bit bigger that we don't do at the user story level, but I might do kind of by the end of the sprint. So let's say the integration testing, right? Let's say that we don't have a lot of automation, so integration testing is actually pretty heavy. Maybe it takes like 2 days to integration testing. So I can't really do it for each individual user story. What we do is schedule, let's say we schedule an integration test every Thursday. So I don't do an integration test for each individual user story, but I'll do user stories together test. Let's say we do the same with the UAT testing, right? So stuff like integration tests and UAT testing, what that means is that an individual user story can be considered done, but I still need to run integration tests and user acceptance testing on it before I can actually, before the end of the sprint, right? Now, there are some things that are even bigger, right? That maybe I have to wait to release, like the security. So scan is bigger. In fact, let's say your security scan, let's say that your security scan, security told you that the security scan takes 1 week to get on their schedule and then 1 week to run it, right? So 1 week lead time, 1 week execution time. Well, if you have a security scan that's going to take 1 week lead time and 1 week execution time, the problem is I can't do it at the individual requirement level because I'll never have anything done. I can't even do it by the end of the sprint, right? because the sprint's only 2 weeks long. So I have to do before I go live. This, by the way, this 3-tier model assumes that you have multiple sprints between releases. If you release at the end of every sprint, then your release level and your sprint level are the same. If you release at the end of every sprint, your sprint level and release level are the same. But here, what this means is I can be done with the user story without the security scan being run. I can even be done with the sprint without the security scan being run, but I have to run a security scan before I go live. Right? Same with the regression test. Let's say the regression test, full end-to-end test of the complete system. Let's say we don't have enough automation in place, so I can't do it yet at the user story level. I can't do it yet at the sprint level. I have to wait until the release level, right? What this means is that it's just heavier, right? So I have to backload that a bit, right? Now, there's some things I backload that aren't necessarily heavy. I just want to backload it for other reasons. For example, let's say one of the things in our definition done is update the user manual. Okay. Well, let's say a team decides, you know what, we don't want to update the user manual at the end of each user story. We don't want to even update the user manual by the end of the sprint. Let's just do it sometime before we go live. So we put it right here. Okay. Great. So I'm going to start with this side here, right? So what this means now, this is our definition done. Here's what this means. That means that for any individual user story to be done, these 3 things have to be true. Does not guarantee anything down here. Right? But by the end of the sprint, everything up to this layer must be completed. And if we're trying to go live November 1st, then everything down here must be addressed prior to November 1st. Any questions about this concept so far? Right, no questions so far. Well, let me give you some examples where this is helpful. So years ago, I was working with a government agency. It was at the time, I was working with the CFPB, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They're a government agency here in the US. And so we had just started doing Scrum at the CFPB. So then what happened was security approached us and said, hey, IT folks, if you're doing Scrum, how are you going to ensure your systems are secured? So what I did with security is I oriented them to our definition of done. And what security said is, all right, if this is your definition done, here's what needs to happen. Before you go live, we have to run a full security scan, and it takes 1 week lead time and 1 week execution time to run it, so 2-week turnaround time. So we said, okay, we'll put in our definition done, and we know that at least 2 weeks prior to our release, we have to start working with security to make sure that the scans are in place, right? Security also said, well, on top of that, here's what might be helpful for you. There's a lighter weight scan that you can run yourselves. So we put lightweight security scan that we run ourselves, right? And that takes about a day to run. So what we'll do is we'll run the lightweight security scan by the end of every sprint, right? Then after this conversation, what we realized in a lot of environments, there's a whole ecosystem involved in getting things to production, especially like in a highly regulated industry like finance or the government. And so then what we did is we met with other people. We met with contracting, we met with the PMO, we met with privacy and legal. And what we identified is, right, hey, if this is our definition done, do you need to be in here? So what happened was we had to run different groups started chiming in. We had to have legal sit in the sprint reviews. Right. Contracting reviewed contracts before we go live. So it just added to our definition of done, right? And so that kind of helps ensure that we have a great working agreement with the rest of the organization, right? Now, I'll tell you another quick story where this is helpful. So many years ago, I was working with a small startup. The product owner comes in one day and says, team, we need to go live. Team said, okay, great, we can go live. It takes us about 3 weeks to go live. Product owner said, 3 weeks, 3 weeks, nothing, right? We need to go live now. Team said, we can't, we need 3 weeks to go live. Product owner then said, what do you mean 3 weeks? We're doing Scrum. Scrum says potentially shippable software at the end of every sprint, right? Team said, yes, potentially shippable software. It takes us 3 weeks from actually being potential shippable to truly shippable, at which point the product owner and the team had a big disconnect and went back and forth. What they didn't really have was a good definition done setup. Because if they did, what the product owner and team would be on the same page with is that for user story to be done, it's everything up here. For a sprint to be successfully completed, it's everything here. And then before we go live, all this stuff right here has to be addressed. And this might represent my 3 weeks worth of work, right? And so at that point, we recognize that at the end of any given sprint, there is stuff we have to do before we go live, and we can make plans around that. Yeah. Any questions about that so far? Couple more notes. One note is this. You create your definition done when you first start the team, but over time, you're going to optimize and tweak your definition done. Give you one quick example of this. I was working with a team where the enterprise architect came in one day and said, hey, this is on release 3, by the way. In release 3, this is our 3rd release production. The enterprise architect said, you can't release live tomorrow. We said, why not? Enterprise architect said, you can't go live in this environment without the enterprise architecture forms being filled out. I wanted to say, technically we can, because we already did it twice, but I didn't say that. I figured that probably just get us into more trouble. But what I said is, okay, so what does that take? So the enterprise architect said, here's some forms you have to fill out. It takes about a day to fill these out. I said, a day to fill out? My taxes don't take that long. Why is it so heavy? But that was a separate conversation. But what we did is, okay, we just added it to our definition of done. So what we had to do by the end of sprint is fill out the enterprise architect form. Right? So as you learn more over time, you're going to optimize, tweak, and adjust this. Yeah. Now, question to the group. Right? Let's say I am trying to go live November 1st. Let's say I'm trying to go live November 1st, right? If I'm trying to go live production November 1st, when's the latest I can get my product security for them to start testing it? Question to the group. If I'm trying to go live to production November 1st, when's the latest I can get my product to security so they can start running it given this scenario here? 1 week lead time, 1 week runtime.
2 weeks prior to the release.
Yeah, 2 weeks prior to release. That's a great answer. Who said that?
Aaron.
Aaron. Yeah, great answer, Aaron. But here's the problem. So let's say I get to them. Let's say I get to them October 20th, right? But now here's the problem. Let's say they come back to me October 25th and says, hey, I need to spend, the security comes back to me and says, hey, we're partway through our tests. We've already identified 350 open security vulnerabilities. If I'm trying to go live October 1st, November 1st, and October 25th, they tell me they identified over 350 security vulnerabilities. What does that mean for my product? What does it mean for my release date? What's my problem now?
Turning around fast enough and then rescanning. So there's no opportunity to do that. Sorry, I think I might have misunderstood your question of like, when was the minimum amount of time?
No, you answered it correctly, Aaron.
Okay.
And I mean, mathematically, you're correct, Aaron. So mathematically, if I just did the math, you are correct, Aaron. And that's what a lot of product owners do. So you didn't misunderstand anything. What you said is right. But what happens is in a perfect world, everything scans out fine and I'm good. But what we found out is, oh no, we have a problem. If I wait till that last moment to run the scan and it doesn't go well, that's a problem because I have to fix it and then I don't have time to run the scan again. That's going to push our dates, right? That's a problem. Some stuff down here, like the updating the user manual, I'm not so much worried about that. But things like security scan and regression tests, if I do those too late, the problem is that I may not have time to recover. What this is to show is this. When you push things down later in your tier here, we often do it because it's heavier, but it's dangerous because if I push things down later, the problem is I'm holding this inventory that is risky until we can expose the risk. That's a problem. So question to the group, how do I manage that risk? How do I manage that risk? How would I manage that risk?
Maybe make the security scan part of a sprint, a couple sprints previous.
So yeah, a couple of, Aaron, your answer is good. So there's really 2 ways to address it. One is if I can make this, right now it's down here because it's too heavy. But let's say I can trim this thing down. So it only takes, instead of taking 2 weeks to run, I can work with security. So it takes 3 days to run. Well, let's say 2 days to run, right? If I can trim it down smaller, then I can move it to here, right? And then what happens is this is no longer 3 weeks before I go live. Maybe now this is only 2 weeks before I go live, right? And what I'll do here then is run it by the end of every sprint. If I can make this smaller, maybe this is now 1 week before I can go live, right? Now, if it ever looks like this, what does that mean in terms of our release capabilities? If my definition done ever looks like that, what does that mean in terms of our release capabilities?
Ready to release.
I can release at the end of any given sprint. There's nothing technically stopping me from releasing. At the end of any given sprint, nothing technically stopping me from releasing, right? Now, if your definition of done ever looks like this, what does that say in terms of release capabilities?
You don't even have to wait till the end of the sprint. You just finish the story and move on.
That's exactly it. That
Or-
means that, I'm sorry, keep going.
No, sorry, ready for release, that's all.
Yeah, what that means is basically I'm the equivalent of Amazon, Salesforce, Netflix, Google, one of our former government clients, USCIS, release production every day. What that means is you have real abilities, right? In fact, if you've ever Googled this. How often does Amazon release production? Every 11.7 seconds, right? Now that's kind of a wonky number because they do a lot of stuff on the back. It's not the same team, and there's a few things there. But what Amazon has is a hyper productive DevOps pipeline, highly pipeline there, right? But what you want to do as a team is you want to identify initially what my definition of done looks like, and then optimize it over time. Oh, by the way, can you folks hear me? I just got an internet unstable message.
I can hear you.
Awesome. So what you want to do is optimize it over time. Now, let's say you're in the environment where you can't make this thing smaller. You can't make security scan smaller. Mitigate that risk then. You still have to run it before you go live, but let's say I'm trying to release once a right. If I'm sure, what I would then do, maybe schedule it to right. So it's not one big big testing at the end, but if I schedule it monthly, I can catch things throughout the cycle instead of waiting till the end. So things like security scan and regression tests, if you have longer time between releases, what I would do is try to reduce the size of it so I can run them more often, and simply schedule them to be run more often so it's not one big batch surprise at the end. Right. Any questions about this concept so far?
One question, Richard.
Yeah, go ahead.
So let's say last you explained at the PBI level, right? Like all the post-its at the PBI level. Then what we will be discussing during the sprint review?
Oh, so remember, sprint review, it's not for the team, it's for feedback from the stakeholders, right? So in the sprint review,
Right.
by the time you get sprint review, I would say almost all of this is done. Sprint review is not about testing quality, it's about testing, it's about validating the need. So in sprint review, we present what we built and we say, hey, does this meet your needs? Would you like us to change, adjust, tweak any of this before we move on? Let us know what you think, right? So in sprint review, it's get feedback from my end users, customers, and stakeholders to make sure what we built really meets their needs. By the time we get, I've been in environments where if we're in sprint review and something breaks, that's considered very embarrassing. Sprint review is not for testing, it's to ensure that what we built really does meet their needs.
Yeah.
By the way, I'll say this, if I had $1 for every time someone said, oh, that's what I said, but it's not what I really meant. If I had $1 for every time someone told me that, I'd be a rich person, right? And so the sprint review is a great chance to make sure that what we built meets their needs. Yeah. In fact, I would say that a good thing that here is gathered feedback from sprint review. That's a good one to put here. Got I'm sorry, my typing is horrendous today. There we go. Yeah, good question. Yeah. Any other questions about definition? On the exam, except there's no exam for you guys, this is a free webinar. But if there was an exam, one of the CSM test questions on the exam is, what does a definition done help the team produce? Right. Anyone know the answer? If you take the Certified Scrum Master class, one of the test questions is, what does a definition done help the team produce? What is the correct answer? Let's see who remembers this from their CSM, their Certified Scrum Master exam. The definition helped ultimately think about this. What is a team really producing?
Minimum viable product.
Yeah, they're producing the product itself. What the definition done helps to do, it helps ensure that the governance, compliance, and quality is built into our product. It's a checklist in essence to make sure that our governance, our compliance, and our quality is built into our checklist. In fact, if anyone's ever flown a plane before, I think a great analogy for this is when you fly a plane, the pilot does a pre-flight, everything's in place. Consider this a similar checklist that ensures that the governance, compliance, and quality is built into our product. Awesome. Let me go back to the slides for just a moment. All right, this is a few notes from an article a friend of mine wrote for the Scrum Alliance, definition done, but it is a checklist, and this is something that you'll be updating over time, right? You create this initially, both your definition of ready and your definition of done. You want to create it initially, and then via your retrospectives, you want to optimize and tweak it over time. All right, a couple quick notes before I close out. Once again, Richard Chang's my name. Once again, here's my contact information. Let me copy and paste this into the chat window. All right. Feel free to join us on LinkedIn. Feel free to follow us on Twitter. Feel free to reach out to me at any point. Also, once again, here are the series of courses. We also offer software development as well as leadership coaching, agile coaching, Scrum Master services. Feel free to reach out to us with any of your agile training, coaching, or software needs. Any questions I can help answer before we close it out? All right. Well, with that said, feel free to reach out to me at any point. Thank you all very much for your attention, and I hope to work with a lot of you folks again. And I see a lot of familiar faces in here, so great seeing a lot of the names coming in. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your week, folks.
You as well.
Thanks.
All right, team, I'll catch up with you later. I'll be online for a bit. If anyone needs me, I'll be online for about an hour or so. Thanks, everybody.